Commissioner, we are also waiting on Mr. Andy Carr to join us as well.
Yep. All good. Hey, John, can you hear me?
Yeah, is that me?
No, John
No.
Treewan, SDC.
That's the trouble with two Johns.
Two Johns, yeah. I'll call you Mr. Reid.
Okay.
Yes, Chair, I can hear you.
Do you mind just flicking an email to Raywin and just ask her if she's going to come on? Raywin Solomon, Commissioner Solomon.
Here she is.
Here she is.
Oh yeah, good.
Morning, everyone.
Hi, Raywin.
Morena.
Morning.
And back to Mr. Treewan. Is Justine coming in with you, John?
Here.
Yep, I'm here. Here, Rob.
Oh, okay. I'm zooming in over my phone, so for some reason I don't see everyone's little pictures.
All right. So, yep, I'm in the corner there somewhere.
Yep, no, all good. So I think based on what people have said, we're just waiting for Andy Carr and James Bentley to join.
I'm here. James is here.
Yeah,
Morning,
g'day. Hi. So back to the chat, folk, as I can't see. Has Mr. Carr joined yet?
No, not yet.
Not yet, no.
Well, shall we commence anyway? Back to the chat, folk. Are you happy to commence anyway? And Andy Carr can join in when he does. And if we have questions for him, we can ask those when he joins. Is that all right, or would you prefer to wait a few minutes?
No, I'm happy with that. He's really just available to answer any questions that your panel may have. So,
all right.
As you say, we can do that when he comes on.
Sure. Okay, with that, well, let's formally convene the hearing, reconvene the Malvern rezoning hearing, and at this stage we're hearing from Castle Hill Adventure Tours Limited, and we granted their request to postpone the hearing of their submissions until today, and in the meantime caucusing has been undertaken and a joint statement has been provided, and we've also received a memorandum from Mr. Treewan and Mr. Reid, provided some additional evidence yesterday. So before we turn to Castle Hill Adventure Tours Limited representatives, Mr. Treewan, is there anything that you wish to bring to our attention, or Mr. Bentley bring to our attention at this stage?
Probably not at this stage, Chair, from me. Just what's been laid out in my memorandum is my latest thinking on that, on the Castle Hill application.
All right. So,
And likewise for me.
sorry, what was that?
And likewise for me, nothing further at this stage.
Okay, well, we'll probably have some questions for you after we've heard from the Castle Hill representatives, so that's all good. So, Mr. John Reid, back to you and your group. Thank you for pre-circulating all of that material, which we've read, so you'd be pleased to know you don't need to read any of that out loud to us, but you're very welcome to highlight key points for us, and then we'll see if we have questions for you. And Mr. Reid, should we start with you, or do you prefer we started with Mr. Smith?
Thank you, Chair. I would like to start by just running through the people who we've got group available.
Yeah.
And then after that, I will, as you say, highlight a few of the things that I put in my recent report. And then happy to answer any questions at that stage.
Yep, that sounds good.
Well, as you know, we've got Paul Smith sitting here from RMM Landscape. Andy Carr, when he comes on for traffic matters.
I'm here.
Oh, you are here, good.
Yeah.
Morning, Mr. Carr.
Good morning.
Dan Tremune for general planning matters. Craig Ireland from Bonish Consultants is not appearing because we've had a very full report from Hugh Blake Manson for the council on the matter of services, and it's been resolved satisfactorily. A geotechnical assessment was done and by Tetra Tech Coffee, and so there hasn't been a need for anybody to appear for them. To date, we've supplied a lot of material, a lot on the history of the formation of Castle Hill Village, in particular to highlight the fact that this bit of land was actually freeholded at the same time as the land for the village from the Crown in exchange for the reserve land around the rocks at Castle Hill. So it's always been seen as a part of, in our thinking, as a future part of the village. From there, we've also provided a full report on tourism and the need for some sort of chain hotel or certainly high-end hotel accommodation in the region. And if I may, then I'll refer now to my most recent report, and particularly start by thanking the panel for giving us the extra time that has resulted in us being able to largely reach agreement and to finally polish the terms of the proposed new zone. Just working on highlighting one of the big things that occurred really was that we found that the ice hockey rink had been shown on an earlier approval plan, but that in the text of the approval, it was to have a further resource consent. And I think this was a little misleading in the assessment process. But I took the opinion that its removal could only make the position better rather than worse. So we've had very fruitful discussions. Let's see, what can I just highlight, because the outstanding natural landscape overlay, I should mention, we believe that once the zone is approved, if we can have a zone approved, that will solve the problem of the overlay of ONL, in particular for the holiday park that's already approved. The big thing that occurred, I suppose, as a result of our meetings was that there was a concern from Mr. Bentley that the view across the golf course, where we were planning to put some buildings on the side, on the southern side, would interfere with the wider view of the limestone outcrops and the general view from the highway to the village. We agreed to his suggestion that it would be better if any further built form was to be concentrated in the area where we've already had approval for the camping ground. And this is in a lower part of the site. As I mentioned in my report, it's interesting to note that it's 15 meters from the highway to the eastern boundary. So it's quite a drop. And so that buildings down in what I call the left-hand corner when you're looking from the highway are largely screened from view by buildings at the top of the property and the planting and vegetation that will surround the wetlands area and the development towards the highway. So that by agreeing to this, we feel that well, the next big thing was that it really impinged on the viability of having a camping ground with tents and caravans in full view of high-end apartment buildings as part of an international hotel. So we reluctantly agreed that, in fact, the camping ground in that the original sense had to be deleted in favour of replacing it with the apartments and the hotel. So that we then all agreed that there would be a shortage of the type of accommodation that is required, the camping ground may have covered for staff and people that were working in the hospitality business in the area. So consequently, all these matters were discussed in full and have resulted in what we have put forward to you in the form of the recent zone. So I think that I should really turn to the situation that we find ourselves. We believe that we've really distilled it down to the really one point, which is the difference between the two landscape experts in the need for a further assessment of the landscape before we move to the zone. On the one hand, we've got Mr. Bentley suggesting we need this further landscape assessment before the zone is approved, and on the other, we have Mr. Smith's opinion that providing we delete the large ice hockey building, a new zone can be approved, and it would be at the time that we provide a very detailed a landscape master plan that a further assessment of its effects on the landscape would then be able to be properly carried out. We certainly aware that until you actually get the architect to finalise the design and placement of the buildings, it's hard to correctly work out the effects on the landscape. And so we believe that this will be covered at that point, and that the committee would be covered in approving a zone with the restrictions that we've put into it. And I think that really, I suppose the last thing was that we would certainly, as I've said here, certainly welcome some sort of guidance as to how we could move forward from here, should it be thought that we do need a further assessment before it's confirmed. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Reid. I'll see if we have questions for you. Malcolm, would you like to start?
Yeah, no questions for me, thank you.
Raywin, questions for Mr. Reid?
Yes, I do. Morning, Mr. Reid. How long have the owners owned the property?
50 years.
Wow. So regarding the outstanding natural landscape, did the owners have any input into the property being included in the overlay?
Certainly. We made full, we were opposed to it, and we've submitted in opposition to the ONL. And in fact, prior to it being publicised, I'd had a number of meetings on this very point, because we felt that although we're surrounded by outstanding natural landscape, we felt that an overlay is a really blunt instrument and really could not be applied to our particular site, which already has modified in a lot of ways and had approval for a holiday park.
Okay, thank you. I have no further questions.
Lindsay?
Thank you for that. Look, I think the nub of the issues is around landscape value. So I don't have any particular questions. Your rationale for your development has been laid out to us, but I think there's still some potential devil in the detail on landscape issues we need to work through. So thank you for that.
And Mr. Reid, thanks, Lindsay. Mr. Reid, I've just got a couple of questions. I just want to clarify my mind. So at various times, there's reference to the ice hockey / skating building. Is that the same as what others refer to as the tourism building?
Yes, correct. We decided it needed a more a higher level sort of name rather than being so specific. It's really some sort of stadium for those types of activities.
Yes, okay. So that's the one you've conceded could be removed in your 12th of May evidence.
Yeah, well, exactly. It was land that I called in the last application set aside, meaning that it would be land that we would actually freely make available to some sort of entity that would be prepared to carry on this with support from the local community, and that still stands. But we didn't want it to affect our these proceedings. So we're happy that it be attacked at another matter at another time, if that was necessary.
Yeah, understood. And could either yourself or Mr. Carr just update us on the situation with the intersection with State Highway 73? I understand some upgrading works were underway or shortly would it be underway, or where's that?
So yeah, so I can leap in there if that's okay, John.
Yeah.
So the widening of the seal has taken place. The fencing of the old access has already taken place, as I understand it. I've spoken to Mr. Collins. He would be comfortable that we didn't include the trigger rule if Waka Kotahi had formally accepted that those works were complete, ostensibly complete for their purposes. The tricky thing, of course, is trying to get a fast response through from Waka Kotahi is very difficult. We haven't had a response. And so although we're sort of in an odd situation that the works are complete, there doesn't seem to be a dispute that the works are complete. It's just that we don't have a formal sign-off from Waka Kotahi at this stage. So that puts me in an unusual situation. I would be very comfortable saying to you that a trigger rule is not required because the works are complete. But because we don't have that formal sign-off from Waka Kotahi, I'm finding myself in a situation where I have to say to you that I think the trigger rule is technically required because we just haven't completed that loop. We've got 359 degrees around the circle. We just haven't got that final last degree. So I can't appear before you and say that it's absolutely watertight.
All right, thanks, Mr. Carr, for that update. And I guess in terms of that, then, given that level of actual progress on the ground, if as a panel we find in favour of the rezoning request, I guess there's no real downside to the trigger rule, is there? It's not going to cause a complication.
Well, that's it. It's potentially just by the time that the district plan comes through the process, it's quite possible that the works will be completely done. And the rule will be superfluous, but you're right, there's no harm in having the rule. And just for clarity, the form of the rule agreed by Mr. Collins and myself that's set out in the joint witness statement is the one that we still are supportive of.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for that. Now, Mr. Reid, happy for either you or Mr. Smith to answer my next question. I'm just looking at the outline development plan that was attached to the amended provisions that came along with the joint witness statement. It's near the end of that suite of provisions. I think it's on page 19 of 20. And when I'm looking at that on my screen, the question I have is in terms of the proposed development sub-area, what, if any, buildings would be located in what I'm going to call the top left-hand corner of the ODP, which is sort of directly opposite what I think is the intersection that leads up to the Castle Hill Village. So in between, say, the highway and the land management sub-area. Now, what, if any, buildings would be proposed in there?
I can answer that. I think that at this stage, the we of course haven't had an opportunity to do any design work on this, and because we're keeping any buildings in this area that you're discussing down to 8 meters. The idea is that it would probably be only it may be the hotel reception area, I could imagine, with the apartments being focused in the lower end of the site. But certainly that's where the original plan showed that 12-meter building with setbacks and the different height restrictions that we put on. We now don't see that as being the site for the ice rink building. I would see them as having low-key one-story building.
Visitor centre reception.
Yeah, visitor centre reception, that type of thing.
Okay. All right, well, that's all I have for you at the moment. So I guess we can proceed to your next witness. We just had a helpful answer from Mr. Carr. So Mr. Smith, Mr. Reid, would it be best if we hear from Mr. Smith now, or did you have a different order in mind?
No, I didn't, but I did question if there were any particular things that Mr. Tremewan might be able to answer. He was dealing with sort of general planning matters. He is here, and I thought that perhaps we should finish really with the landscaping matter, because that's I think the nub of the situation.
Oh, look, okay, that's fine. So I'll just see if the panel has any questions. So Mr. How do you pronounce his name? I didn't quite catch it.
Tremewan.
Okay, we'll see if we have any questions for you. Malcolm, any questions?
No clear questions for me, thank you.
Raymond?
No questions. Sorry, no questions from me.
Thanks. And Lindsay?
No questions from me either, thank you.
And I'm in the same camp, so there you go.
Thank you. Well, if I'll now ask Paul Smith, please, if you would like to comment on your report.
All right. I've just got a few notes to read here, commissioners, if that's okay.
Yep, carry on.
Firstly, thank you again for providing the time so we could work through this master planning process with Mr. Bentley and Mr. Tremewan. I definitely found they were more than happy to work through this process, and they're very forthcoming to probably go through 3 workshops and all the emails. So thank you very much to Mr. Bentley and Mr. Tremewan on that as well. So the overall ODP and policy provision for the proposed zone have been substantially altered through this process, as you've noted. The noteworthy changes that have occurred include the activities originally proposed within the visitor accommodation sub-area have been moved to the northern half of the site. These activities replace the consented activities within that area and are clustered with the consented restaurant, bar and golf buildings. Moving these activities has resulted in the southern half of the site being maintained as open space, as it will contain the golf course. The heights of buildings have been reduced and aligned with the setbacks from the highway and the topography descending to the east. An overall footprint for each activity type has been included. Regarding this, the footprint for one activity type cannot be used when calculating the footprint for another activity type. And that's that can be quite important, that you can't, if one building area falls short of that maximum footprint, essentially that results in additional open space when it comes to the future development. And lastly, due to the ability for any development to be poorly designed and implemented, rule requirement 5 has been changed to require a comprehensive landscape management master plan and a package of information to be prepared that demonstrates how this development will integrate with the site, how it will tie in with the character of Castle Hill Village, and how it will maintain the identified values of the O&L. These substantial changes to the proposed zone have covered off most of the issues raised in Mr. Bentley's evidence. It is worth mentioning that in these circumstances, design and assessment do go hand in hand. In saying this, as an expert, I was required to consider the potential landscape and visual effects, including cumulative effects of these changes to the proposal whilst working through this process and considering their appropriateness within the sites and its surrounds. Throughout the workshops, overall building coverage and the policy provisions to restrict these were a clear concern. Additionally, finding out that the ice skating building was not consented, which is a large building, came as quite a surprise, and this new information needed to be carefully considered. After finding out that this building hasn't been assessed in the landscape, I can understand Mr. Bentley's opinion, and that this building needs to be assessed as a proposed building rather than a consented building. However, throughout this process, it has been considered cumulatively. Based on my experience and my involvement in this proposal to date, I consider that the removal of the provisions for this large building, which is approximately 1/4 of all built form, along with the removal of the cabins, the caravan parks and the campground facilities, will result in appropriate level of development within the site. And for reference to table 1 in the joint witness statement, what is now, if the ice skating building is removed, the overall development equates to 8,850 square meters of building coverage, which is approximately 5.1% of density of development within the site. And additionally, the strong worded requirement that the landscape master plan and package of information that is required to be prepared and approved by council prior to any development being consented should provide council assurance that the future development will integrate into the site, tie in with the character of the Castle Hill Village, and maintain the identified values of the O&L.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. That was a helpful summary. I see you were reading out some notes. Are you able to email those through to our hearings administrator, and then we can have that for our future reference?
They are handwritten. Are you happy to receive them just as a scanned copy, Commissioner?
Absolutely, as long as we can read your handwriting. If it was my handwriting, we'd be in trouble, but if yours is legible, then that's all right.
I think it's all right. I'll send that through straight after this, Commissioners. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I'll see if we have questions for you. Malcolm.
No questions. I think the ice building was definitely of concern, but hearing the conversations you've had and the changes you've made, I have no further questions.
Thanks, Malcolm. Raywin?
Thank you, Mr.
Yes, I do have a couple for Mr. Smith. I note in the submitter's evidence acknowledgement of Te Kura Tāwhiti, so thank you for that. Will the comprehensive landscape master plan reflect the cultural landscape backdrop recognised by the O&L? Will it do that?
I was thinking about this yesterday, Commissioner, and as this question was raised essentially with Flock Hill Station last month, at this point in time, the policy provision, rule requirement 5, may not be worded specifically enough to achieve that. But through that landscape master plan process, it could be incorporated into that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. And my last question is, and you probably have already answered this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Can a landscape master plan be robust when it has not been preceded by a landscape effects assessment?
As sort of mentioned before, and I think thinking about what a landscape master plan and a package of information will look like in the future for this zone. The package of information would be quite large, and it would include an assessment report that goes alongside it. This is quite common in our practice to do, that we prepare assessment reports alongside the master plan, and these things, I would be involved in if I were to be employed and to work through this process, I'd work alongside a designer who would be designing it at quite a detailed level, and I'd be assessing it as we work through that process. And in doing so, I'd be outlining the issues in relation to Castle Hill Village and how it has to tie in with that, how the landscape values of the wider area and how it has to protect those. And then the design would reflect that, and my assessment would cover those issues off and how it achieves that. So it'll be quite well spelt out, essentially.
Great. Thank you very much. I have no more questions.
Thank you for your questions, Commissioner.
Thank you, Lindsay.
Thank you for that. You've given an explanation about the landscape master plan. So from where we are now, looking at a set of provisions which would be included in the district plan, getting to a landscape master plan, how much effort is involved, and are you confident that the words in the district plan encompass all of what is required in a landscape master plan?
So first off, the amount of work that would be included in that landscape master plan would be quite a lot. Essentially, it'd be quite a rigorous process to work through. We talk about it being a landscape master plan, but there'd also need to be input from an architect to assist with building design and building layout, so they can be located within the site, as well as vegetation locations. And I think probably running through that list in Rule Requirement 5 has been quite, in my mind, quite extensive on what has to be included in a package of information, and the details spelt out to council in the way that it integrates into the site and everything.
Earthworks would be.
Earthworks would have to be covered in there. And in my mind, after wording this and reviewing it, I find that it does provide enough detail for, and the words do capture what that landscape master plan has to include and provide for prior to being approved by council. And
Okay, just in terms of the nuts and bolts and how it would work, before you do anything on that site, you need to put in this landscape master plan. And most of the buildings proposed in the set of provisions are all controlled activities, which can't necessarily be declined. So if the council was of the view that the landscape master plan to be submitted at the first round was deficient, what is the talking to the controlled activity provisions here?
all right, so it's, sorry, Mr. Dash, could I?
Yeah, that's fine.
It's my understanding that the way that Rule Requirement 5 has been worded, that you have to prepare the landscape master plan prior to any other development being proposed.
Yeah.
And that rule requirement, the activity status is a non-compliant activity prior to the landscape master plan being approved. And that's with regard to 5.1 and 5.2.
Okay.
So,
all right. Yeah, that's clarified that. Can we, obviously the removal of, or the whole issue about the ice rink, it has been perhaps dominating previous thinking, but with the removal of that, can you just sort of clarify what the nub of the issue is between you and Mr. Bentley?
So can you read the issue between Mr. Bentley and I if the building was removed?
Yeah.
At the end of our joint witness statement, it's my understanding that Mr. Bentley, without putting words in Mr. Bentley's mouth, was of the opinion that the proposal still needed to be assessed, and that assessment would include an assessment of the ice skating building. It's my understanding that Mr. Bentley remained concerned with regard to the amount of building coverage within the site. And due to that concern, and after raising this with Mr. Reid, to put that issue to bed was the idea that to remove the ice skating building, which was 1/4 of the overall built form. And I thought that would maybe alleviate Mr. Bentley's issue. In my mind, it alleviated my issues with regard to it not being consented and not being assessed. The work that I had done to date, I was comfortable with where the proposal sat.
Okay, so that was going to be my next question. You're comfortable with the removal of the ice skating building, that the built form that would result in terms of an anticipated development under the planning provisions would be acceptable from a landscape perspective in terms of building coverage, footprint, where those particular buildings are guided to go. So that at the level you're at the moment, short of getting any completely detailed master planning exercise together, you're comfortable that it's in a good position.
Yes, I am.
Okay. Thank you, Rob. No further questions.
So, Mr. Smith, just a couple of questions from me. In terms of the existing O&L provisions which currently lay over the site, is it your understanding that if we were to approve the rezoning request, that the O&L provisions would then not apply to the site? Is that how it would work?
No, it's my understanding that this would be similar to Flock Hill Station and Grassmere zone as well, where the O&L provisions sort of are catch all when it comes to a sort of like a plantation forest proposal or something to that effect. So then essentially that these policy provisions don't have to worry about national environment standard or other high level documents at a national level.
Yeah. All right. Sorry, I should know the answer there. I just can't remember what we did with Flock Hill Station, but what you're saying is it'd be a similar situation to that.
Yes, very much so.
Okay. With the site coverage with the tourism building being removed down to 5.1%, in your experience, how does that compare with other similar developments in an area that is an outstanding natural landscape? Is that like left field, or is it reasonably, is that reasonable, or is it unreasonable? Do you have any kind of experience on similar proposals?
They do end up probably having a look at this, and when you compare it to Flock Hill, because I've been heavily involved in that site and everyone here understands that site as well, I think that site also has, I think that's off the top of my mind, 4.8% site coverage. And then from my experience working down in Queenstown, and you look at when you catch, sorry, I forgot the name of it, when you catch the boat across the lake to the station and you can have lunch and things like that. So that's Walter Peak Station. So when you have a look at that area there, you have a look at its own special zone. Again, it is a very small carve out, for a lack of a better word, that allows for a small amount of built form with associated tourism activities. That includes accommodation as well, that is entirely surrounded by an O&L. So similar to this and Flock Hill and these other places, is that they allow people to stay in these areas. They identify that built form can occur in a well-located area, in this instance with a lot of other things that do have to occur. And then it's the wider O&L that remains dominant in this space. We are talking about just under 18 hectare site with 5%, 5.1% coverage. When I was having a look at this as well, like I thought, well, what does, John and James both know, because I showed them the numbers. When I looked at Castle Hill Village itself, which is directly across the road, and this will be seen alongside it as forming part of it essentially, is that there's approximately 300 homes within Castle Hill Village. I hadn't included the new properties because they weren't mapped on GripMap or on the council website, but there's approximately 300 properties and it's 37 hectares of zoned land for development in that area. Working on 150 square meters for each dwelling. It was looking at about 12% built form. So, and that's only houses, it's not including roading, driveways, curtilage, but just from a built form perspective, that was 12%.
There's an additional 50 terraces going up too now.
So yeah. So there's, yes, Dan's outlined that, and James and John had already, we discussed this as well, that there were additional properties being developed, and I think when we added an additional 50 on at approximately 150 square meters, it worked out to be about 14% built form.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, now look, just in terms of the landscape master planning process, from what you said, and it's certainly my understanding of how these things work, but the landscape, and let's just pretend that you're involved. So the landscape assessment would actually inform the master plan. So it wouldn't be, is that how it works? So your involvement or landscape architect's involvement would be quite formative in determining the landscape master plan and indeed the built form on the site. It's like an iterative process. You work together. It's not one after the other.
No, it's very, it's very iterative, that we'd be working alongside each other through the whole process. Yeah. From the initial site, essentially you start to look at, those, if you remember those constraints and opportunities maps that you may have seen in the past, outlining what those are and outlining the setbacks and outlining everything that has to be achieved. Yes.
Yeah, understood. Now look, I just want to ask you about REQ5. And happy for other witnesses, chat witnesses, to jump in if they wish. The fact that the landscape master plan is subject to council approval, in my mind, is a pretty good overall check and balance on what's being proposed. If they don't like what you're proposing, they simply won't approve the master plan, and then none of the controlled activity rules click in. So, to me, that's a pretty good, almost right of veto. But looking at REQ5, I just see the first version I'm looking at doesn't have sort of subclause numbering, but the one that says it's under the words that are in blueprint, so it's the first words in black font, be provided to and approved by the council prior to the granting of any resource consent for the site. It would appear to me that probably a safer option would be to replace the word granting with lodging, so that the master plan has to be approved. So you have to do that whole master planning process, and the council would approve it prior to actually lodging any resource consents. What would be the response of yourself and Mr. Reid to that suggestion?
My response is that that's fine. That's essentially what I was thinking, that you'd have to work through this process, and get approval from council, and again, even through that process, it may include a small amount of mediation and conversations and meetings, because essentially, as James and I had discussed, showing up with a piece of paper and a plan wouldn't achieve that, and I think that's why the package of information is very important in this instance. But just going back, yes, lodging would be fine as well, that this is all covered off before anything went in, so it's not seen in parallel.
I agree with that as well.
Okay.
forced preamp, which is a
Yeah.
great. Yeah.
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 So, Mr. Smith, thanks. I don't have any further questions for you. So back to you, Mr. Reid. And before we just turn to the council officers, see if we have any questions for them. Is there anything, Mr. Reid, you'd like to say by way of a wrap up on behalf of chat?
No, I think that you've highlighted the points that I think were in all our minds, and I think that they've been answered. Thank you.
All right. So now if we turn back to Mr. Treeman and Mr. Bentley, first of all, just see if we have questions for you and then see if there's anything you wish to add after that. So Malcolm, any questions for Mr. Treeman or for Mr. Bentley?
Not at this stage, thank you.
Raymond?
Yeah, no, thank you.
And Lindsay?
Just really question, Mr. Bentley, be interested in any comments you have on what's been said this morning from Mr. Smith.
Of course. Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for this hearing. As you've heard, we've been through an extremely fruitful process over the last couple of weeks to establish the Castle Hill Visitor Zone provisions, which you've got in front of you. You'll also have seen from my evidence that my evidence was pretty much conceived around the ODP and the proposal as it was in March. And as you'll see in my from 6.29 and 6.30 of my evidence, I raised some concerns with the level of development along the southern boundary of the site, and primarily due to the fact that it's maintaining those landscape values, as well as the height, number and scale of the visitor accommodation buildings. So as you can see from what's been presented as part of this hearing, the visitor location buildings have shifted into the northern part of the site, and I'm more than happy to explain the reasons for that if you want. But and also that also the provision of the ice rink building has also sort of been now I understand has been removed, which is a positive from my point of view. So in terms of any further comments that I have, you'll see at the back of the joint witness statement, I do retain some concern over the number of the floor footprint of the visitor accommodation. Under the building coverage REQ1, there's table 1, which explains the building footprint for all the proposed buildings. Obviously that needs to be amended to remove the ice skating rink building, but I do have still concerns around how all of those visitor accommodation has been put in the north, how it will be arranged in the northern part of the site. And particularly with regards to the discussion that you were holding with regards to the assessment, the landscape assessment and the completion of the landscape master plan. Now, I've thought about this quite a lot because I agree with Mr. Smith that as part of the development of the landscape master plan, you are, by virtue of doing that, assessing that master plan from a landscape point of view. So that the main concerns I still have is the fact that that assessment process hasn't really happened from the advancements that we've made through the development of the proposal as it stands at the moment. So even today, with the removal of the ice rink building, a question was raised this morning or earlier around, well, what building will go in that space in the northwest corner of the site of the ODP as it stands at the moment? Because at the moment there was an understanding that the ice rink building will go there, and now that's been removed. That's still classed as development sub area. So that goes to my my concern around the fact that there hasn't been an assessment around whether or not the building could even be supported in that part of the site, considering that there is a 130-metre offset of the state highways for ONLs within the NFL provisions. So it might be that a building could go there, but it might not be following the assessment process. So that's really going to the heart of my concern over the need for a landscape assessment to inform firstly the ODP, that it's fit for purpose, and then the assessment would be around the arrangement of how those buildings fit within the site. So if you go to the REQ1 building coverage, there's an assumption there that the staff hostel and terraced housing of 4,000 and 4,400 square meters is a maximum building coverage. Now, there's been no assessment to understand whether or not that is the right amount, whether it's too much, how that will be spatially arranged on that development sub area, and how those buildings will be seen in combination with the existing buildings that are already consented or will already be part of that master plan. Now, as Mr. Smith has highlighted, there is, with the reduction of the skating rink building, there is a 8,850 square metre built coverage on the site. That is more than double what the existing consent has been granted for, the 2020 consent. And indeed, that consent, that 2020 consent, had a 1,383 metre building floor print increase from the 2015 consent. So my concern is that a comprehensive landscape assessment needs to be undertaken to understand what those effects are, particularly now that it's an outstanding natural landscape, that there are outstanding natural landscape values that need to be considered. The fact that there is considerable built form within Castle Hill Village, in my view, is irrelevant, because that's not part of the ONL. That's the only carve out in the whole of the Waimakariri catchment ONL, because it's a residential zone. This is not a residential zone. It's very open. It's got views to the broader landscape, and contributes to that broader understanding of what those landscapes are. So whilst I am in support generally of the rezoning, I do consider that because of the ONL and the landscape values that are very special in this part of Castle Hill, that an assessment needs to be undertaken first and foremost before the development of the master plan, because I can see, as you've highlighted earlier, the potential for the master plan to go back to say, well, no, we think this is too dense, or the arrangement of buildings hasn't been appropriately considered because it's still affecting the landscape values. And I think that because of that additional overlay as it stands at the moment, that's sort of quite important to get right. And I think also just talking about other development in other ONLs, I think it's really important to sort of just first and foremost outstand the fact that these are each landscape is different, and each landscape has a different carrying capacity based on its landscape values that can support different types of development. And Flock Hill has got its own particular landscape values that enable it to absorb development at a capacity that is different from this site, and that is different from Water Peak. So each landscape needs to be assessed on its own merits, and it's understanding its landscape values and how development can best be absorbed into that landscape. So that's sort of generally where my consideration is. It might be following the landscape assessment, for example, that all of the development is absolutely fine, coupled with the planting proposals and the openness that's an important part of that. But at the moment, I sort of remain unconvinced that has been appropriately addressed through this process.
Okay. What we're actually looking at is the set of provisions, and with the removal of tourism building and structures, there is approximately 8,000 square meters of built development which could occur. Are you saying that it's a little bit cart before the horse? You cannot confirm whether or not 8,000 square meters of built development can be put on this particular site without having done quite a bit of preparatory work before it.
I do agree with that.
Okay. Your recommendation is not to have any particular Castle Hill zone, or is it that the provisions aren't good enough? They don't give you sufficient certainty that the matters that need to be considered can be fully robust. So I'm just really wanting to get an understanding of where you're sitting on the ordering of things. Is this too premature until there is more work done?
I do consider that this is slightly premature, that some of the horse, the cart sitting without the horse, so to speak, that the landscape assessment would very much inform the amount of development that could be appropriately absorbed and accommodated within the site. And since my initial concern around shifting those buildings along the southern part of the site have now been shifted to the north, I had an initial concern that the amount of built form, even at that part of the process, was too much. I raised it in my evidence, and now we've shifted it to the north. I'm still concerned that it might be too much, that hasn't been appropriately assessed in that northern part of the site. So I do consider that is a concern. And even if you refer to the decision of the 2015 development, which had 2,919 square meters of built form, there was even in that decision, there was concerns raised about density of built form at that level, and that was at that time not considered an outstanding natural landscape.
Okay, so the choices for us here to look are to reject, have any site-specific zoning here, just have the underlying zoning. It's on one spectrum. The other spectrum is to accept, the other end of the spectrum is to accept the package put forward by the proponents here, or is there some form of middle ground without actually having a landscape assessment for us to be able to confidently say that it is an appropriate thing to do on this particular site? So where on the spectrum do you sit there? Is it well, we'll do some more work, perhaps come back at a later time and look at a little bit more specificity or some sort of changes or a little bit more direction? Or is there something that could be done with the existing package to say, in principle, yeah, okay, but there's a lot of detail to be worked out, particularly in terms of the quantum and the positioning of the built form in this landscape?
Well, I agree. I think in principle, I do support this proposal. The devil is in the detail and the spatial arrangement, particularly over built form. I also am concerned with the fact that the existing consented baseline is up for renewal in the next week or so. Council will have to process that consent. So that obviously changes the existing consented baseline if that is not approved. So then it defaults back to the provisions that you could provide under the rural zoning. So I'm conscious of that. But in generally, I support the fact that this area can support some level of development. However, I'm questioning the amount that's being applied for as part of this process. But as I've said, I've worked through carefully with the applicant and the submitter on this, and approve in spirit around where we're heading, and totally support the landscape master plan. However, it's coming down to the details of the built form and how that's arranged and how much there is on that part of the development sub area.
So the concern at the moment is with the numbers. It's the square meter numbers in REQ1.
Yes. Yeah.
And so how that is appropriate.
Yeah, and how that's reflected in the ODP as it's presented at the moment, with the fact that that building, the main ice rink building, isn't part of that proposal. So whether that would change the extent of development sub area zone on the ODP, and to some extent, the master planning process might indicate or refine that ODP plan even more as part of that process. So. Sorry, that's probably not answered your question directly, but it's I still think further work is required to better understand how the spatial arrangement of that this development will occur on the site, noting its extremely special landscape values that are present there.
Okay, if you look at it from the proponent's perspective, though, they're wanting a bit of certainty in terms of what they might be able to put on this particular site.
Yeah.
Square meter numbers is going to determine how many things have got a roof over their head.
Yes.
So
yes.
Yeah. And it's without talking to any of the other panel members, there's some difficult choices to be made potentially.
So, Lindsay, is that an actual question, or have you got?
No, that's a comment. Sorry, Rob. I'll probably close off here. You may have some things you wish to ask as well.
So, Mr. Bentley, I just want to confirm, in my mind, the actual site itself, when I look at the ODP, the site within the red dashed lines, it doesn't appear to me that has any particular merit in terms of an ONL. That's a question.
Sorry, the red line.
So the site itself, the chat site, which is shown on the ODP with a red dashed line around it.
Yes, this one?
Yeah. So the site itself, from what I understand of it, it doesn't actually have any really significant landscape value itself, does it? It's located within a larger ONL, but the site itself is reasonably unremarkable from a landscape and visual values perspective.
Oh no, I disagree. I think it is. It's got special landscape value. It's contributing as part of the broader ONL, and you can't as part of the NFL process, we've identified the outstanding natural landscape, and it does include some parts of more modified land than others. Obviously, you've got a concentrated area of a village, which has got a residential zoning associated with it. This part of the undeveloped part of Castle Hill hasn't. But have you visited the site? Have you driven?
We've driven it past it on not site visits for this hearing, but certainly for other hearings.
Yeah, I certainly encourage you, if you do have the opportunity, to go onto the site and to experience the broader open landscape that you've got there. And whilst this site may not have specific high landscape value as other parts of the basin do, this contributes to the broader outstanding natural landscape that is experienced within this part of the Castle Hill area. So it does have specific value, but which is why, particularly that ledge, which is, in my evidence, I've explained hopefully clearly why I thought development along that southern boundary was inappropriate, and it's been pushed more towards the north, primarily obviously for visual purposes, because built form seeing along that high escarpment ridge along the south would be reasonably prominent. So visually anchoring buildings along the north where you've got a scarp topographical landform feature that assists in containing built form. So that's good, a positive thing from my point of view. But it's the other point that I'm concerned about is the sense of openness that is associated with the broader ONL and how that will be accommodated within the landscape master plan.
All right, thanks for speaking. No further questions from me. Panel, do you have any questions for Mr. Trewin? So Malcolm?
No, none for me, thanks.
Raymond?
No, none from me either.
Lindsay?
Just again, Mr. Trewin put out his view on things on Friday. As a result of what's been discussed today, has his view changed at all?
I think the issues are very much the same. I guess it's like you say, Commissioner. You know, it could be a situation of possibly cart before the horse, but if a full landscape assessment hasn't been undertaken, you're not sure whether the level of built form is appropriate in that zone and within those delineated areas in the ODP. So yeah, I'll just echo Mr. Bentley's concerns.
Thank you. I've got no further questions.
So, Mr. Trewin, I'm struggling to understand your concern, given that the council has essentially a right of veto if the landscape master plan is developed in conjunction with a landscape assessment. The assessment informs the landscape master plan. It would also deal with urban form, location and arrangement of buildings. If the council's not happy with that, it doesn't approve it, and therefore nothing can happen. If the council has a right of veto, so what's the concern?
I guess it's the sort of the prince. I guess it's the sort of first principle of the proposal, which is what's proposed appropriate in that area, and I guess having a sort of level of building coverage that is up to 8,000 square meters. It sort of suggests that level of building coverage is appropriate in totality. And what Mr. Bentley's concerned of is that irrespective of any landscape master plan, 8,000 square meters is inappropriate or may not be appropriate without a sort of first principles assessment. Just, I guess, with other rezoning proposals that have been before the panel, we have looked at quite a high evidentiary standard, especially with regards to proposals in outstanding landscape. And when there is particularly quite a prominent site like this, I guess I'm just looking at the precedent, perhaps, of where it's such a prominent site and a full initial landscape assessment hasn't been undertaken.
Look, precedent's not relevant here, is it? This is a district plan review process. The only rezoning proposals are the ones that are on the table before us. Each proposal, Flockhill Station, this one will be assessed on its merits. If anyone else wanted to do anything in an ONL, they'd have to do either a resource consent application or a private plan change in the future. So not quite sure why you raise the issue of precedent.
Yeah, I can see that having a veto does provide a significant safeguard. I'm just concerned that the proposal keeps changing, and there hasn't been a full landscape assessment of the proposal that lies before you at the moment. But I do concede that there is an opportunity for council to say no later, which does provide a safeguard.
What if, and what if the provisions were amended to make it clear that the landscape master plan has to be informed by a comprehensive landscape assessment? So to really codify what Mr. Smith said would be the case, that it would be an iterative sort of hand-in-hand process rather than a sequential one. Would that alleviate any concerns, or would it lessen the concern in your mind?
Potentially. I have to defer to Mr. Bentley on the workability of such a process, though. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I would be supportive of something like that, but what I would be cautious of is when you look at REQ1 building coverage, and to say, well, terraced housing 4,000 square meters. I mean, 4,000 square meters might not fit. Basically, it might not fit in that site and still maintain landscape values that we're looking at. So it might be that there's a range. For example, of built coverage, if that's the approach that the commissioners are thinking of, and that within that range, built form could be considered and then assessed, and then council can at least say, well, actually, you're at the upper part of that range of built form, and we think if you remove a couple of buildings, that would be fine. That sort of thing. It's giving council that comfort that there is some potential reduction of built form, but it might be that the assessment says that the built form is absolutely fine. At the moment, we don't really know that.
All right, so here's a proposition. What if REQ1 and Mr. Trewen and Mr. Bentley, you can answer this jointly, and then I'll ask the chat representatives what their view is. What if, hypothetically, we were to say, okay, the table 1 in REQ1 is amended, so instead of being stated as absolute limits, they are up tos. So terraced housing up to and not exceeding 4,000 square meters, and we would amend that provision to say that the actual amount of square meterage is subject to confirmation through the landscape master plan approval process.
I think that would be helpful, along with some form of landscape assessment that would accompany the landscape master plan.
Yeah, so make it clear that yep. So amend the landscape master plan wording to say it has to be part and parcel of a landscape assessment, and then we make REQ1 and up to, with that to be confirmed through that master planning process. Mr. Trewen, would that further alleviate your concern?
Yeah, I think that would be suitable, actually. Yeah, provide an additional safeguard.
Yep. Yeah. Okay, so then back to the chat representatives, Mr. Smith and Mr. Reid. Did you understand what I was suggesting then? And do you have a view on it?
If I go first, I had been thinking while this was being discussed that there would be a need to match the eventual figures to the approved master plan. Seemed to me it was logical. If in fact you get a master plan which is then approved by everybody and it totals up to 3,800 or whatever square meters, not 4,000, you could then amend the figures in your suggestion. I think is a way around that. I think that I would support that.
It would be fair if it can go down, it can also go up if the iterative process is.
No. Mr. Chairman, I haven't asked you any questions.
Sorry.
I'm tempted not to ask you questions because you have a conflict of interest. You have a financial interest in the outcome of this process. You're not an independent expert. You're not a planning witness. So I deliberately haven't asked you any questions. So it might be better for the chat team if you just keep quiet at this stage. Yes. So, Mr. Smith, do you have a view on what I proposed or suggest the solution?
It sounds to me, your suggestion, I agree with your suggestion. I think maybe the way that you've worded it is a lot more, it's a lot more clear than what has actually been written. I think what you've suggested is probably the intent and what would be intended on occurring anyway, as you previously asked me.
All right, no, thanks very much for that, and thank you, Mr. Reid, for that concession. So, panel, any further questions for the 42A reporting team?
No, that's a great suggestion. Clears things up very nicely. Thanks.
No, not from me either, thanks.
And
And
Lindsay?
nor me. No, thank you.
All right, well, thanks very much, everyone, for your contributions, all the work that's gone on to date, and there has been a lot of it, which we've been happy to accommodate. It's always helpful of us as a panel if issues can be resolved in a cooperative manner, and you almost got there by yourselves, so that's good. So we'll bring this part of the hearing to a close. So can everyone log off, accept the panel, and accept Mr. Trewin? And then Mr. Trewin, because I'm on my phone, I can't see what's happening. So can you just tell me when everyone else is definitely logged off?
Yeah, thank you from our side. Thank you very much for everything that's occurred. It's very helpful. Thank
No,
you.
you're welcome, Mr. Reid.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good to be part of the process. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cool.